All right, so we're diving into motivation today, really digging into it. You sent over some really fascinating stuff from Umair Spire, and you're trying to figure out how to, how to keep that ball rolling, right? How to stay motivated, and that's what we're going to break down today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to be looking at the positive.pdf you sent over, and I think the big question we want to answer for you today is how can you build like real lasting motivation? Not just like fleeting inspiration, but consistent drive, especially when it comes to, mastering those guitar riffs.
Right. So like not just getting pumped up for a day or two,
Okay.
but how do you keep that going for weeks, months, years?
Exactly.
I think a good place to start is with something the source material touches on right away, and that's this distinction between motivation and discipline. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that really jumped out at me too, because motivation, like you said, it's that initial spark. It's exciting, but it's fleeting,
Right. It can disappear really easily.
Yeah, like morning mist. But discipline, that's about showing up even when you don't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for you, thinking about those guitar riffs, discipline is what's going to get you there. Those regular, even small efforts, that's how you make real progress, even when you're not feeling super enthusiastic.
I think that's spot on. Motivation might get you started, but it's really those habits you build, those habits that are rooted in discipline that create the long-term trajectory.
Yeah, totally. And that kind of leads us to another really crucial point the source emphasizes, and that's the power of purpose, like your why.
Right. And this is where things get a bit more personal, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious for you, what is it that really drives you on a deeper level? Like, what's the real reason behind these goals you have?
That's a great question, and it's one that's worth really taking some time to think about. When things get tough, and they will, having that strong, clear why, it's like an anchor. It keeps you grounded and focused on what actually matters. It's not just about the goal itself, it's about the deeper meaning behind it.
And that internal why, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? The material also talks about how much your environment impacts your motivation levels. How have you experienced that?
Oh, totally. I mean, think about it. If you're surrounded by negativity or distractions all the time, it's so hard to stay focused and driven.
Right, you're constantly fighting against the current.
Exactly. And the source really emphasizes the importance of cultivating a supportive environment, both in terms of the people you're around and the things you're consuming.
Right. Are those people and those things pushing you forward or holding you back?
Yeah, it's about being really intentional about those influences.
Absolutely. And building on that idea of positive reinforcement, the source also talks about the power of those small wins. What resonates with you about that?
I love that because it means that progress doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming thing. Celebrating those small achievements like nailing a tricky chord change, those little victories along the way, they actually build momentum.
It's like a snowball effect, right?
Exactly. The source calls it a positive feedback loop. You achieve something, it feels good, and that motivates you to keep going. Can you think of a small step you took recently that gave you that little boost? And how can you build more of those into your practice?
I think that's a really valuable question to reflect on. And on a related note, the material points out that sometimes action itself can actually generate motivation. What do you think about that?
It's almost like the opposite of what we normally think, right? We usually wait to feel motivated before we do something. But the source is saying, just take that first step, even if it's tiny, and it can actually spark that motivation.
It's like jumping into a cold pool. Sometimes you just got to go for it.
Yeah, and once you're in, you start moving around and you warm up. So for you, what's like one super small thing you could do today, even if you don't feel totally inspired?
Right. What's that first step, even if it feels almost silly?
Just to get the ball rolling.
Exactly. And finally, the source touches on something that I think is crucial for staying motivated over the long haul, and that's the importance of rest and consistency. How do you see those two things working together?
Right. They seem kind of different at first, but the source makes a good point that burnout is like the motivation killer. So regular breaks are super important. They're not a sign of weakness. They're how you stay fresh and engaged.
It's about sustainability.
Yeah, and the point about consistency over intensity was huge for me too. It's those steady, regular efforts that get the best results over time, not just those crazy bursts of energy every now and then. So how can you build more consistency into your routine while also making sure you're resting enough?
It's finding that balance.
Exactly. So just to wrap up what we've talked about today.
Yeah, to bring it all together.
The key takeaway is that motivation isn't just this magical feeling that you wait around for.
Right, it's not passive.
It's something you build. You strengthen it by understanding the difference between motivation and discipline, by staying connected to your why, by paying attention to your environment, by celebrating those small wins, and by taking action even when you don't feel like it. And of course, by making sure you're resting and being consistent.
And as a final thought for you to consider, of all the things we've talked about, which one feels like it could have the biggest impact on your motivation right now? What's one tiny change you could make in the next 24 hours that you think would make the biggest difference going forward?
Yeah, what's that one thing you can do to really move the needle?
Exactly.
So much good stuff here to think about.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Absolutely. Until next time.
See you then.